Do that. Hi, everybody. I wasn't ready to do that. I wasn't quite ready, but we're not doing the intro today. How's it all going? How's everybody doing today? Welcome to another episode of Heavy Metallurgy's Wednesday Album Club. It's been a day. My head is in other places for some reason, but it's good to have everybody here. It's good to be joined by my awesome co-host today. We got Jim down there from Eihwaz Recordings. How's it going, Jim?
Going well. Glad to be here. Ready to talk about some werewolves.
Absolutely. We got Kellen from Killing for Company. Kellen, how are you?
Here, happy to be here. We're rolling in hot today. I feel this one's going to be interesting right away.
Right.
We're throwing out the script. We're just going to go.
Exactly. As soon as it said we're live, I'm like, oh crap, I'm not ready.
We'll do it live.
And of course, we got TJ up in the corner there from The Glorious Dead. How are you, TJ? Well, we've all gathered here today to talk about TJ's pick for the week. It was Werewolves, The Dead Are Screaming. Hold on, let me blow you up. And then in the darkness, we can't see crap. Great. It's like a Sasquatch photo. But a little bit about the band. They were formed in 2019 in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, and features members who have been in countless bands, most notably Abremelin, Consummation, Ruins, Bloodduster, The Berserker, The Antichrist Imperium, and countless others. Since 2019, the band has released 3 full-length albums and 1 EP and are currently signed to Prosthetic Records. Yeah, what do you guys think about this one? Jim, what were your initial thoughts regarding The Dead Are Screaming?
Well, yeah. When it started out, I was initially like worried because the vocals and the way they're layered, the high and the low, really didn't like that. We'll get to that later. But then the music kicked in, and I really enjoyed it. It's punishing, it's brutal. The riffs are technical without being overly so. So I was immediately drawn in, and actually really enjoyed having multiple listens to it and being able to dig out the really interesting riff and arrangement choices here. It's good Australian black death metal, and it was a fun listen. Yeah, so first impressions was a thumbs up, and there's a couple things that I'll point out that I wasn't super a fan of, but by and large, I think this is a strong record. It was nice to have something that you kind of got in and got out of, these guys are really straight to the point, and there's nothing too long. Their songs don't overstay their welcome. So a nice way to get through this week.
9 songs, 32 minutes. It's a short one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Kellen, your thoughts?
So the artwork immediately sort of struck me, and then I remembered I'd seen the album cover for the record that followed this, like What a Time to Be Alive, I think is what it's called. And it's like a naked woman ripping guys face off, and I was like, oh, this kind of sounds like my speed. So I take a look, and I remember I listened to it and I never came back to it. I didn't remember why. And this time around, I still had this like a very strange, like the first time I listened to it, I had a difficult time sort of qualifying the sound. There were a few things that didn't quite come together, and it took me a while to sort of put my finger on it. But yeah, it's a pretty brutal listen, but it's also a convergence of like very disparate styles of extreme metal. So it kind of was an odd flavor. We'll got to get into that later, but an interesting listen that was fun to listen to this past week.
All right, TJ.
Yeah, I stumbled on this band. I think I was digging around on Bandcamp or something, doing one of those deep dives, left clicking your way into oblivion, looking for cool stuff, and I just found it by accident. And I just was like, wow, this is killer. I like some of the, the new grind bands that are around newer. I mean, these guys are real fresh, but, Nails is another band that comes to mind. Full of Hell has some pretty killer shit. So this stuff was, and my first impressions of just their delivery and their authenticity and what they're doing. It's like they're dabbling with some new school feel, but they're still there's still so much oldness to this, classicness to what they're doing, and their pedigree kind of shows that's why. But definitely I was this really got a hold of me off the first listen for sure. So my first impressions were definitely killer.
First impression for me, initially wasn't in the mood to listen to it. As a style I don't listen to as much as I used to, but a few times through it, it's one of those albums stylistically that I felt could sit very comfortably on the same shelf as Nasum from Sweden. Very similar style of death grind. They've got the super memorable riffs, but they mix in some very interesting song structures and ideas here and there. They break out of the pummeling tremolo picking with some very cool bridge work and different guitar flavor here and there. But the songs are short, scathing, cool melody choices. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Nasum, and this felt about the same quality as that. Maybe not produced as well, but it's still really pretty sharp, good modern sounding death grind record. I liked it. TJ, you had some sort of a question for the class.
Yeah, so my question is like basically, so when does the speed become too much with these bands? Like, at what point are we crossing the line from prowess and skill to nonsense? I'm thinking of bands like Infinite Annihilator and stuff where you're getting into stuff that is so obviously programmed, and the drummers can't even play the stuff half the time. I've read articles from producers and stuff that are like, these bands come in, the drummers can't play the material. I'm spending the entire mix, fixing their drums and quantizing their drum performances. So what point is it really detracting from? Because we're all here. We've all grown up when the speed became a thing, where we went from bands like Destruction and whatever to that Slayer we thought were so fast, and then all of a sudden Napalm Death explodes, and it's like, oh my God, what is this insane drumming they're doing? And so that's really, it's like, at what point does it become too much? Is there is there a limit to it? Where it can just be too much, or do we just have to kind of take it as it comes in context? So that's kind of my question. I'm sorry, it's a bit rambling, but there was a lot of little facets to my thought on it. So anyway,
who wants to go first? I'll go first. Screw you guys. You're thinking.
Everybody's like, that was dumb, whatever you said, because I just don't dummy.
No, I think metal humans in general, they always want to outdo themselves, and speed has become it's become a crutch. It's become a very familiar staple. The impact of it, I think, is lost over the years because it's commonplace. Super exacting, insane blasts. Another thing, bands like Napalm Death, back in the day, they're hiding behind in the recording, the way the drums are recorded, and the fact that Napalm came from a punk, from a Japanese hardcore mindset. I mean, it's just super chaotic. Mick wasn't a super exact blast fiend, but you're hiding behind the way the album was recorded. And as time has gone on, recording processes have gotten a lot more clear, and it has forced drummers to be as exact as possible. And let's be honest, not everybody is perfect. Not everybody, this music, the way we've kind of evolved into the speed, humans aren't perfect, and this music now demands and dictates the fact that the drummers have to be perfect. So yeah, there's a lot of fixing in the studio. It's just the way it is, because no one can play. I mean, yeah, I shouldn't say no one. There are drummers that can do this, and they've spent their lives practicing and honing their craft, blowing out their knees. I mean, I heard the dude from Cataclysm back in the day, Northern Hyperblast is what they used to call their music, and he had knee surgeries because, I mean, these dudes are athletes. I mean, they're running a race and using joints that will wear out after a while. And like Hellhammer, you hear, I've heard him in interviews say that in his formative years, he would rehearse 7 to 8 hours a day. You see why these guys are so good, because they clocked in the hours. But I think I'm drifting away from the question here. When is it too much? I would say with Werewolves, it's not too, I mean, it is what it is. It's kind of a death grind thing. And this is just kind of what we expect right now. I don't know if it's too much or not enough. Infinite Annihilator, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, that guy can't play it. He fakes it in the playback videos. He messes with the shutter speed and stuff, and he fakes it. If you can't play it and you're going to play live, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's that to me is too much. Bands like Werewolves, bands like Nasum. I mean, I've seen Nasum 2 or 3 times over the years, and it was great. The drummer wasn't outside of his means, and but we've just kind of become accustomed to this speed. I know we'll see, there's some people, I think blast beats are kind of a crutch, and I think a lot of times they're unnecessary. I love them, don't get me wrong, but a good riff doesn't need to be blasted over most of the time. But anyway, Kellen, your thoughts now that you've had time to think about it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for going first and saving me there. So I think that's a really interesting question, given also the background of this band. So when you first brought up that question, TJ, the band that I thought of, which this shares members with, is the Berserker, because they had programmed drums back in the 2000s when I remember them. Yep. And it was just such a what in the world, right, am I listening to?
I think the drummer is from Blood Duster. He came from, let me see here.
So so the next part of that is the drummer from this band played in Psychroptic, which is a tech death band from Australia, okay. Which was like over the top tech death from that era.
Right.
So the reason I bring that up is, if you were to ask me that question in not necessarily like a formal analysis of drums, but like a historical time period, I think it's a good sort of place to begin, because that era for me is when it became exhausted. Somewhere in the mid 2000s, I feel people got so burnt out on the athletic nature of extreme metal drumming.
Like Christian, bands like Christian, Nile, all these turbo death bands, they kicked it into a whole nother realm.
Like where drummers are trying to play 300 beats per minute and, hyper black, all this incredibly technical drumming, but it got to the point where that was the aim of the bands at the time, was to see how far they could push the needle in terms of speed, and making memorable songs that you could pull off the shelf 20, 30 years down the road and be like, this is a great extreme metal record that had lost its, influence, or at least its draw, right? Which you saw the pendulum swing in the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult for me to say, because I still love a lot of extreme metal drumming, and occasionally they'll put their hand on the stove at that pace, but I can't remain there very long or in the course of a record. So even my favorite, grindcore records that are super dense and blast beat driven, they've got enough sort of dynamic pull back in the opposite direction. And I think that's what's difficult about the further you get down the road with extreme metal drumming in particular, and playing in general, is I need a if not an equal amount of balance in the opposite direction, or some new interesting ideas, before extremes end up being a sort of an experience of diminishing returns. It no longer has the same impact that it once did, just because it's constant. And I feel somewhere in the mid 2000s, that became sort of so dominant, everyone just got, tired. It's right. It's like how much hot sauce can you take before it ends up just being like you lose all your taste buds? You know what I mean? Like,
Hey, my butthole burns.
there you go. Right? Like you need enough flavor to sort of make it an interesting sort of experience. So as we'll get into like the diversity of this record, because I think they are trying to offer other elements that make it a bit unique, but I understand sort of that time period and some of the bands that they're sort of pulling as influences from the mid to early 2000s. Like I can hear I'm interested. The psychroptic drumming, I hear that at times on this record. The death grind vocals from the Berserker absolutely are on this record. So I was cognizant of that when I was listening to it and being like, okay, here in 2020 when this record comes out, that's not as dominant a sort of a persuasion. So will it still have as much sort of intrigue? And we'll kind of get into that later. But that's how I kind of approach your question, is in terms of a time period in which it kind of got burnt out in terms of speed.
All right, Jim.
In the context of Werewolves, I think they mix it up really well. I don't think there's too much of one or the other. I think it's a great balance. But in general, to TJ's point, for me, any record, if it's like, if there's like little to no tempo change and it's just blasting throughout beginning to end, I'm bored just a few songs in. I love blasting, but only in the context of like when there's a good tempo change coming up. And that doesn't mean that, it has to happen in every song, or that it has to necessarily be halftime or a chug riff, whatever, but there needs to be some sort of break in it to make it interesting. A lot of times my favorite things about, nonstop, speed thrill drumming is that moment when the transition occurs. That quick moment right there, because that brings a lot of tension and release to the song, and just gives it more color. You know what I mean? So, and that's why I like grind, even though I do like it, and I've got plenty of grind out. I've got Nasm and Pig Destroyer stuff, and and of course a lot of Napalm Death. But aside from the Napalm Death, I really don't visit my grind albums very often. I'm not often in the mood for it, and I think that's the same reason. Is that even though there are like some really cool tempo changes in those bands I just mentioned, for the most part they're so quick and they're so far in between that it's just not enough for me to like want to listen to a whole album of it. I'm kind of like, it just starts turning into white noise for me after a while. So I think that, a little more arrangement for me personally is more interesting. And sometimes I like wonder there's probably a lot more cool grind out there, but I wish I had more patience for it. But, so I think I'm kind of on the same wavelength as everybody else that for me, there is a point where it can become a wash, but for whatever reason, Napalm doesn't do that for me. I can listen to their stuff, especially anything Utopia Banished Back. You know what I mean? I love all that stuff. But yeah, not much more to add there. Other than to say that, I think who we're talking about tonight, doesn't fall into that, snow on the television, zoning out with noise, kind of effect. These guys have a lot more have a lot more intriguing choices made, in the way that they put together their arrangements on this record.
I think res metal kind of mirrors my thoughts here too. My speed limit is war metal. That's too fast for me to enjoy or care for. Me too, and it kind of boils down into noise at that point, or with a rabid dog barking over the top. I don't know. It's not my thing. TJ, how about you?
Yeah, so the question wasn't necessarily directed at this band in particular. I think we've all noticed that they break their songwriting up, they break the songs up, and the songs actually they really kind of take a journey. Where they pummel you, but then they take it, and then they're like, oh, we're gonna go off and we're gonna groove this out a little bit, and we're gonna bring it down just a hair and get something that's real heavy and thump on you with that for a minute. it just made me think about it, because the grinding in this record is so precise and so on point, and it just made me think about, it's like, well, when is it too much? And I think this conversation, we've had this conversation in the band and, personally and at times. And it's like, for me, it's like, I remember when, I was there when Blast happened, and I remember how enamored I was with it. And just it's like, oh my God, listen, what are they doing? And this is incredible. And you wanted to, just consume everything that had Blast in it. And, little bit by little bit, it became so, the oversaturation of it just became monotonous and tedious. But then of course, like everything else, it shifted, and, it became, an accent and a flair and a flavor that gets thrown around. And some bands really do really well with it, and other bands don't. To my end, for my part, anymore, I like to see the balance. I like to see it weighed against the context of the song, and, let the song kind of dictate that, as opposed to just like, we got to have, we're writing an hour's worth of material and we got to have a blast in every song or whatever, some bands do that. And, granted, it's all kind of contextual, I'm not familiar with this Berserker at all. I've never heard, but, you look at like Blood Duster or something. No, that's a band I really like listening to. I like those guys. They're goofy and powerful and fast, and, more Australian insanity. And, that was, just blasting away and whatever. It was really cool, but, there can be limits to it. And, again, like with Jim, I love Napalm Death, one of my all-time favorites, the classic stuff. And even the more recent material got better. They got into their weird kind of mid period where they were doing kind of some stuff, I don't know, like the Diatribes era stuff I wasn't too crazy about, but still, they kept it interesting, and the power and the speed was there to punctuate and accentuate what they were really trying to deliver sonically. So it was cool. And and so, yeah, so I mean, for me, it's like, I just think that there can be a limit to it, but I think that, anymore, there's bands that's what they're about. And then there are bands that use it just as one more, arrow in the quiver, so to speak, another piece of their arsenal of sonic expression. But I do think that there can be overkill for it. I mean, especially like the war metal thing. It's like, yeah, that stuff I don't care about any of that stuff generally. And it's just, it's just silliness, but again, it's kind of all, there's no accounting for taste, it's, people are into what they're into, and some people are just so rabidly enamored with that, but I remember what that was like too. I mean, just, the first time I heard blast beats on, Symphonies of Sickness or something, it was just like, wow, dude, this is great. Listen how fast it is, Yep. So yeah, for sure. So, just that's kind of my take on it anyway. So
right on. Let's talk about the musicality and composition of The Dead Are Screaming. Kellen, let's start with you.
Oh, wow. Okay. Where do we want to go here? This was probably the hardest part for me on this record, because it is like a interesting mixed bag of genre convention. So they're not quite, I get they're going for like a blackened death metal band, right? So like there's that side of it, which, and I get.
See, I don't get that. You guys, a couple of you have said black. I haven't heard any of that in this.
Sure. Okay. So I think
it's there. It's there. Listen again.
It's there.
Here, for me. Okay. So
that's what Metallurgy calls
part of, like,
too.
if they did not have that as like one of their genre labels, there may be less hesitation here. But then there's this technical aspect of the band, which, so for me, it's like, okay, you're taking two sides. That you take that like tech death side, and you take, for me, which is a clearly like the pinnacle of Black Death, something like Angel Corpse, right? Like they don't land clean in either one of those camps for me. So there's
Hazel
a
Corpse.
well, this band, Werewolves,
band.
does not sound ugly enough to me to be like a blackened death metal band like I'm thinking of here, right?
Right.
It's not Hammer of the Gods, right?
Yep.
So then the vocal phrasing and sort of multi-tiered sort of thing brought back kind of a death grind from the 2000s sound for me. Like that's what I heard. So it's partially tech death, kind of there's a little bit of like a tremolo sort of guitar riffing that would lean it somewhere towards black away from death metal, but it's not sort of ugly or dark, or the production's too tech death to be black metal for me. So I had a difficult time sort of balancing the nuances of the band to completely dive in. So interesting. So, I mean, we talked about they are a incredibly fast, blast driven. There's some interesting sort of like breakdowns and sort of riff structure to this at times. I'll give you that, but just the all out pacing, they weren't ugly enough to be black metal or grindcore for me. But they're just almost too simplistic to be a tech death, and it's not quite heavy enough to be pure death metal. So for me, what came back was like, this reminds me of like if Cattle Decapitation got a hold of a werewolf theme. That's where my head went the entire time. Is it felt like an interesting, or instead of they were going to talk about like whatever veganism and slaughtering cows as a metaphor for modern humanity, if they were like, hey, how about we do that with werewolves? That would be this band for me. It's an interesting sort of like blend, and like the death grind vocals reminded me a lot of Travis. It doesn't have his like sung aspect, his weird sort of song thing, but that like very modern intersection of a lot of different sort of extreme metal styles, which I had a difficult time sort of, trying to put a circle into a square sort of deal. Like I never completely got there with this band, but all of that is happening. Now, I do not want to take this moment to miss out on the lyrical contributions of this band. Now, Ted nodded. Can we talk about the lyrics? So to the absolutely amazing Dog Nodded, the third track here. Now, we've had a few really special moments with lyrics on this album club. I know Vicious Rumors, we had a fun time going through the lyrical content there.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we've ever reached the apex that is Dog Nodded. So
why don't you share them, because I didn't read them.
Okay, well, I will share them for you. I think we're at, in terms of this being monetized, I think we're how far into the show? Okay, we'll roll.
We're good. It doesn't matter.
There's no cursing. It's just an interesting display of animal anatomy in this one. So here we go. I'll just say this. Bulbous canine member will brutalize, swells in fury every stroke, knotted victim losing hope, supernatural prostate pumping with relentless hate. I mean, the lyrical content. Oh, and Ted, when TJ came up with Ted Nodded, I was like, oh, this one must have struck a chord with his heart. Because special. I mean, that is just like a brief moment. I would encourage everyone, sit down with your family tonight and look at the lyrics of Dog Nodded. You'll be surprised at the lyrical genius on display here.
Yes.
But yeah, it just goes on for like another like 4 stanzas with the same sort of metaphor there. But I just want to take a quick moment because like, here's another point where I wanted to drive home this Cattle Decapitation sort of analogy is they are in this kind of balancing a little bit of a grindcore social criticism aspect to their lyrical content and theme. And at the same time, bouncing back to this like blood duster, fun grindcore, like goofy, we're just not trying to be taken too seriously vibe. So I feel Cattle Decapitation operates in that same space where they're also trying to make some sort of commentary on whatever's happening in society today. At the same time,
social or
it's like,
political awareness type shit.
yeah, and it's also like, here's a human falling out of a cow butt. It's like the same, like how much serious you want to take it kind of deal. So
Right.
Anyway, I did not want the dog knotted genius to go unnoticed for this trees. Anyway, with that, I will relinquish the floor and let the rest of you panelists jump on in.
Yeah, Frosty thinks that was T.S. Eliot. All right, Jim, how about you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really like the music of this band. For me, what it sounds like is kind of like a grindier version of Absu. You know what I mean? There's a lot of technical thrash style riffs going on here. With some these guys sound like they're tuned to standard though, so that I think that's what kind of pulls them back away from like the death metal things more, and maybe pushes like, when they're especially on let's see, actually I think there's a riff in Dognana that sounds kind of black metal, but definitely on Showering Teeth. If you go and listen to that one, the closing track, there's some black metalisms there, and when they go dissonant and stuff like that, when they do some dissonant tremolo picking, it kind of gives that black metal feel, but it's still always kind of a little bit of grindy, a little bit of death metal, but I hear a lot of black and thrash is what I'm getting at, and I like that style. I like that kind of stuff. I like the really technical black and thrash like Absu and stuff, and so that all kind of works for me. What bothers me is actually the vocals on this. Like the way they're really high in the mix, they're kind of dominant, and the way he layers the high and the low together, I'm sorry, it sounds like deathcore to me, man. I really don't like that kind of sound. You know what I mean?
Never even thought about it that way.
Yeah, it kind of distracting to me. And it sucks because like when he's just doing the raspy voice, or he's just doing the death metal style voice, I think it sounds great. But when he like lowers it together, and I think there's like a little bit of a pitch transposer he'll throw in every once in a while to make it sound like really low and octavey, like that's my biggest criticism of the album, because I'm like almost waiting for that weird like bass hit, you know what I mean? Like when he does that, brrr, boom. Yeah. But luckily it never happens, and so I think this stylistically, my hair is going nuts. I think stylistically, if I can say that word correctly, it's just a choice on their part, and I don't know if they're younger or what, and they think that kind of thing is awesome, but I think that if you want to do, I think there's plenty of death metal and Black Death, whatever bands that do that sort of high-low mix, but it has just a more raw, maybe mid-rangey kind of sound, not so precise and pristine sounding, that makes it sound, for me, more aggressive. But when you kind of pull out the mid-range and you like clean it up really nicely, you put it at the front of the mix and you throw the highs up, then it sounds like a little too core-ish for me. So so we'll get that out of the way. Obviously, not a fan of the layered vocals, but I mean, I think the performances are great though. I mean, the riffs are super interesting for me. I like Berating Those We Despise has a nice Covenant style riff at the beginning, which if you do a little Morbid Angel aping, you're always going to get me on your side. So that's just who I am there. Gnaw Their Bones especially has a little bit of like a later era Absu style, which I'm a huge fan of. They do it really, really well. They have a lot of precision. On Irate, as I mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of like really cool drum moments, especially cymbal based, and there's some China work on that song that's just like headbang inducing. So, I highly recommend the performances on Irate, for terms of musicality, really, really well done. And then and also in that song, like As If the China is Not Enough to Make You Want to Bang Your Head, a couple minutes in, there's a scale based riff where about a minute and a half in, that's definitely makes you want to pound a wall. So I really like that. And and to Kellen's point, the lyrics are really strange and uneven. Like, yeah, sometimes it's like horror, sometimes it's like social political stuff. And her later album was like the album after this, like he just got lazy and was just like, I hate you, fuck you, all that stuff. I was like, really, man? Like, I think the guy's kind of not trying to figure out. He doesn't have a clear vision of what he's trying to convey lyrically. But song title wise, all right, man. Fountains of Bile, like beating those we despise. I mean, showering teeth, like you just have that image, showering teeth, like, so there's, he's got some great song titles. And I think, someone in the comment mentioned, Drunken Metalhead Musings mentioned that as well. I bet I totally agree. Great song titles here. So, I do think it would be cool if he kind of decided like what he wanted to do. Do I want to be political, or do I want to be horror? Do I want some Satan? Do I just want to say I hate everybody? Whatever you want to do, that's cool, man. But like, pick somewhere. And so where Kellen kind of sees like the music is disjointed a little bit, I don't think the music for me is disjointed. I think the lyrical approach is disjointed. So it's hard for me to picture where I want to put Werewolves. You know what I mean? And that's okay. It's okay to kind of like confound your listener a little bit genre wise, but it's weird for me to listen to a band and they confound me lyric wise. You know what I mean? And what their intent is. So that's for musicality and composition. I'd say musicality, it's spot on. I'd say compositionally in terms of lyrics, like just a little just disjointed for me, and definitely like, hey man, go with the rasp or go with the death. Don't layer them up and put them super clean in the mix, because then you're going to confuse me about what style you are, but I just kind of, when on subsequent listens to this record, I just pushed that weird those weird vocals to the side and just really focused on the music. And if you just do that for me, like it's a really, it's a good record. So there it is.
All right. TJ.
Yeah. So I had issues with the vocals on this too, but I didn't mind the layered and the high and the low. For me, it was just more so the kind of monotone death vocal that he's using. It doesn't seem like he put a lot, it's just, it works and it's good, but it's just kind of your standard, if it were pop music, everybody sounds like Britney Spears kind of thing, it's good and he's good at it, but it's just kind of meh, whatever. But the songs carry everything so well that it's just kind of a nitpick more than anything. I think the their performances on this record are spectacular. The riffs are great. I love, for me, it's like I'm hearing guys who have pedigree that spans a lot of bands, and they've kind of brought all that in. And to me, it feels focused. To me, it feels like, we're doing this kind of, just punishing death grind that has a blackened flavor to it. I don't think it's an overarching theme of what they're doing, but to me, it's not, it's unmistakable. I feel like it's there. I hear it, and the way they're delivering it, the tone, the sound of it, the riffing and stuff, not so much. They 1 minute they got their toe in more, the riffs are more modern, stylistically, and then they're coming down out of the grind stuff and they're doing this classic almost Discharge style riffs, and bringing this kind of classic crunchers that just thump you over the head, and then they're right back into beating the shit out of you with all that blast. So I think they did a really good, the songs in this, I think they couldn't be much better than they are. And the one thing I like about grind that's good, is that if the songs are really well crafted, a 3.5 minute song can be so unmerciful that it just feels way longer than it is, but in a good way, because they're taking you on this journey. And in 3.5 minutes, it's like, wow, it went all over the place, but everything was so good, and you were so drawn in by the song and the structure of the song and the riffs they use. And with these guys, that was, from start to finish, they did such a good job of that. I mean, 3 minutes and 41 seconds. It's like, God, that song just, there was so much going on in there. You know, and it you know, from start to finish, it was kind of the like that all the time. And the lyrics. Now I was reading something, an interview with one of these guys about the lyrics, and when they, in the subsequent releases by this band, they kind of, they've got this attitude like, you know, we're sick and tired of all the bullshit politics and all the stuff that's going on. So they're basically, they're really more thumbing their nose at everybody and telling everybody to eat a bowl of dicks. Sorry, monetization board. But you know, you know, and then the lyrics kind of evolve out, you know, more into that as the other records come. And so that's, you know, on this record, you know, I noticed it too. It's like, you know, like the dog nodded and stuff and the werewolf thing, and you know, maybe that's supposed to be their theme song. I don't know, but they get more, you know, the more kind of tongue in cheek stuff. Is that right on? And sorry, I was reading the comment.
That's right.
Comment. Oh yeah. But yeah, you know, so and honestly, I really kind of, I don't always necessarily agree, you know, with exactly what they're trying to say, but I like the way they're trying to say it, and I like the way they're delivering it. I like the way he writes his lyrics, and the whole kind of, you know, I'm willing to step out and say something. Yeah, taking the piss for sure, you know, for sure. And I dig that. I dig that a lot. Where you can kind of, you know, say something in your lyrics that, you know, you thumb your nose, you can, you know, and you still kind of taking a stand, but you're not, you're still, you know, you're still kind of like to the affirmative, where your attitude is like, you know, I'm kind of sick of all you guys or whatever. And so I'm just going to, you know, I'm going to kind of lay it here like this. And so I think it's kind of cool. But you know, dog nodded notwithstanding, I mean, that is definitely a, you know, do you even Robert Frost, bro? I mean, come on. It's like, you know, I mean, it's just, what can you say about the bulbous, you know, the Thralls of Metal. Yeah. I don't have the other two yet, but I've listened to them all, and they are great. I mean, this is cool. I don't really have any real, I mean, I think they just deliver, you know, really on all fronts for me. I like what they're doing. I love the way they kind of mix it up, you know, to Kellen's point. They are kind of, you know, they're kind of drawing from this, you know, pool of influences. I mean, you know, you're going from Acre Cock to Blood Duster to whatever, you know, these guys have been in all kinds of stuff. And, you know, if anybody's ever listened to Acre Cock, it's like this bizarrely progressive, you know, death metal band, very interesting band. But you know, and so it's like, and then on this, you just have this kind of summation. I was like, you know, we're just going to throw all this in here and just make a blasting grind juggernaut, you know? So yeah, I was really pleased overall, you know, I really think it's great.
Okay. Yeah. For me, first impressions of this album, I don't think it's doing anything necessarily new or exciting or inventive. Which until you start really digging into the album, it's kind of like, you know, another album in a sea of albums like it. But the more I spun this record, the standout for me is the riffs. The riffs are, these guys walk a really good line between an old school flavor, kind of simplistic, more of an attack based style of riffing, but they're little sidesteps into these more colorful bridges. The riffing gets really interesting. Kellen mentioned, you know, hinting at tech, and there's a little bit of tech there, but they keep it more memorable, which some bands that fall into under the tech umbrella, they lose sight of that. You know, bands like Vector, they somehow get super crazy, but their music, their riffs still remain an element of catchiness to it. But the vocals on this record, they don't even, I'm so focused and dialed in on the music and the drum work. I mean, the drum work's exact, it's perfect. The punch, the attack, the easing off the hammer a little bit. it's so perfectly structured and musically interesting. The vocals to me kind of acted as another instrument. They didn't stand out as annoyance. They didn't stand out as great. They're just kind of there for me. So that was kind of a non-issue for me. But the music, it all boils down to the music here for me. And I think their songwriting, they don't stay in a song long enough to really do much damage or make too many wrong steps. They're just really focused on the 1 or 2 minute. Well, I have it pulled up here. I don't think there's any. Yeah, there's a couple songs over the 4-minute mark. 427 and 437. I mean, that's plenty. That's what this death grind style that they're working in. That's plenty. And they don't go into the weeds really at all. And when they do make a change, it's usually the song needed a change at that point, and the change is typically far more interesting than the riff that was before it. So there's obviously a pedigree here. I mean, every member of this band has been in a bunch of bands. I mean, their list is long. It's long. And some of them, I think all of them have been in the band, the Antichrist Imperium. Two of them at least were in that band. So they know what they're doing. They're writing good songs. I guess now that Jim mentioned it, there might have been more of a deathcore type of vocal style there. But again, it was so off my radar. I was so focused on how interesting and catchy the music was. I tend to overlook it. But let's talk about the production for a spell. TJ.
I thought it was, everything comes out, everything shines in the mix. I think that it gets almost too perfect a little bit to me. It just, there's, for all its rough edges, there's a lot of there's a lot of polish on it in spots that it just, but I think that's kind of where the modern flair of it comes, whatever. But overall, I don't really have any real gripes with it. The vocals are a little high in the mix. I think I agree with that too. They probably would have lived better, instead of on top of it, a little bit more inside the songs instead of on top of them. But by and large, I don't have any real complaints about it. The stuff shines really well. There are moments when the drums just seem a little overproduced and they start to come across as artificial and stuff. But it sounds to me like that maybe, kind of something in these guys' bag of flavors that they like, that apparently that Berserker band is kind of like that, I guess, from judging what you guys are saying. And
they're kind of industrial. There's like a drum machine. It's industrial slant
right.
to it.
And so, and again, it's not, it's not necessarily my favorite. But all overall, it's just, it's the delivery on these songs is so good. It's such sick stuff. It's just like, I'm not really too distracted, the bass shines at moments, and I just think they did a really good job with it. They really, the guys all seem to really know what they're doing, and they deliver the goods on it for sure. So, definitely a thumbs up on the production overall.
All right. Jim.
I love the guitar sound on this. It's good and thick and clean. And I think that it's perfectly balanced in the mix with the bass. And everybody knows I love distorted bass. The bass just sounds it's crushing on this. It's distorted and mean, and it's ever present. You can always hear it, and that may be a little bit, alluding to their, grind influence that they've got going on there. But I think it works really well with the super clean guitar, super dirty bass. It's a great sort of dynamic, the way they play off each other in the mix. It keeps one from overpowering the other. I think the drums are really well balanced in the mix as well. Unlike we were talking about a band last week, that had cymbals kind of pushed in the back, and these guys don't have that. I mean, you can hear what he's doing on the cymbals, and so he makes, for me, a lot of interesting choices on the drums. He's not just like blasting the hell out of them because he is, but he's doing interesting things. There's moments on here where he's just like hitting the hell out of the ride. Just tang tang tang. I love that kind of stuff. He's doing that on there, and when you have you're bashing the ride or slamming chinas, the drums sort of arise in the song and make themselves known and push like the intensity of the music forward. So there's a lot of that here. I mean, the guy's an extremely talented drummer for sure, and the vocalist is also the bass player. He does a great job too. I mean, these guys, this is a 3-piece, and there's a lot of sound here. I mean, this is a big wall of sound that just 3 guys are making. And, I mean, you could say it's production too, but I think that, their overall attack, kind of like, reaches past what happens in a studio and is emblematic of like, how talented these guys are. And on, I mentioned Showering Teeth earlier. I'll say it again. Another cool thing about the very beginning of that song is the guitar and the bass. They're doing these tremolo picked like melody lines, but together, and it just sounds really, really cool. The bass is following him on it, and it's not, to your point, Marty, not like overly technical. It's just technical enough to make it interesting. It's just cool. You know what I mean? Where you're like, wow, man, I like what he's doing there. He could just be like, as a bass player, choose to write a lower note and let the guitar do a little bit more of the, the theatrics with tremolo and melody, but instead he's following with him on it, and it makes for a great closer. Like it really draws you into that last song and adds to its power. So, musically, I think this thing is produced extremely well. I really like it. Again, my complaint is the vocals, way too high in the mix. I found myself just like really trying to not pay attention to them, because I really wanted to hear what was going on. They weren't like completely subverting the music, but definitely when they would do the layering stuff, then like, the riffs would get blown out by, and I was just like, come on, man, you got a great raspy voice, got a great death voice, just, do one or the other. If you're going to do both, fine, but like make it sound dirtier. Pull it back from the mix. You guys are fantastic musicians. If anything, the drums could have been a tiny bit louder, and I think that would have been awesome if like the drums were a tiny bit louder, bring back the vocal craziness a little bit, and let those instruments breathe, because I think that's where these guys' strength really lies, is in their musicianship, their tightness. There's a lot of if I can get this word out, syncopation between the drums and the guitar, and especially on one song. Oh man, which one was that? Sorry, give me 1 second. I do want to call this out because I thought it was really, really cool. Yeah, it's on Fountains of Bile. On Fountains of Bile, there's some really cool syncopated rhythms with the guitar and the drums. They're just in lockstep together. Kind of reminded me of like Extreme Aggression era Creator, but with the not kind of going out of time a little bit like Creator would tend to do. And also, there's a little harken back to some other of their Australian teammates, also in Fountains of Bile. There's kind of like a nice ulcerate moment in the last 30 seconds of the song. Like I was like, I see what you're doing there. So, like again, so musically, production wise, really great. I just wish there wasn't so much emphasis on the vocals, because for me, that's like the weakest part of the band. I mean, their strength lies in their instrumentation and the way that they perform. So hopefully on, later releases, they'll pull that back. But that's really my only gripe with this is that because the music and the production, I think, outside of vocals is spot on.
Kellen.
It's a death grind record that's produced like a tech death record. That's
sure.
what
that's accurate.
I would say.
Sure.
Like, and that's just my perception. Like, I would imagine after all of their years of playing, this is very deliberate. Like, they want this record to sound, visible and articulate enough in terms of what they're doing instrumentally. If they wanted to make this sound uglier, they definitely could. They may have already made all those records after 2+ decades of extreme metal playing. So I personally would have enjoyed if like we could have taken a little bit of the weight out of that Necros Christos album and thrown it in here, just to add a little bit more muscle to it.
Right.
Whereas like, and then the Necros Christos, we could have gotten a little bit more articulate, sort of like top end to the sound. Because I just want this to sound as a grind record. Like, I think Nazem or Rotten sound meaner and uglier by comparison to this record.
Yeah, that's true.
And like, you know, even when Jim pulled the Perdition Temple record, like that also to me it's a Black Death record that sounds different to me. There's a certain amount of precision to their sound. And I think for fans who want to hear an extreme metal record performed by talented musicians doing some really interesting things with their respective instruments, this is going to be all over this record. The grind part of me, you know, TJ mentioned there's moments on this where they sort of will shift gears into something that's like we're gonna slow you down and smack you over the head with a baseball bat kind of riff. Like I want it to sound ugly in those moments, and this is a little bit of sort of smooth or well behaved production at times. So
the Werewolves are too beautiful.
Yeah. That was kind of the one detraction. So I may be sort of the contrarian here and in the minority, but I just wanted a little bit of an uglier record, personally, for my taste. But I think for a lot of fans who are interested in like a different kind of sound, or don't want to be like, I am like, just here's a comparison statement here. I probably, out of the four of us, have more patience for the war metal noise. So, and that's it. If I were to pull one of those records, like last year, Embrace of Thorns was my favorite in that style. They had a record that came out that I really liked. And maybe all of you would be like, "It's horrible. This just sucks. Get this trash out of here."
My problem with war metal is I mean, I do like Archgo, but typically with straight up war metal, it's coming from one zone, and it does one zone really well, but that's it. I mean, I don't know.
It's a compare. There's 100%. I remember your many opinions on the new Revenge record, Marty, that I can from the streams. So I
used to get so tired when a new Revenge record came out. Every YouTuber would show a Revenge record and go on how great it was. I'm just like, God, it isn't. It just isn't. You're wrong. You're wrong. You like the aesthetic of the record, the propaganda aesthetic of the record. It's just. Ugh.
Anyway. I'm a little bit here potentially in the minority, but for me, as an extreme metal record, I wanted a little bit more sort of, I guess, a less of a tech death production, in my opinion. But
gotcha. That was kind of what I was alluding to, and you surmised it a little better than I did. But that was really kind of, there are moments on here where the production just kind of gets so clean that it takes away from some of that grind aesthetic, and I totally agree with you. I totally get what you're saying. There are moments where it's just like, it's a little too perfect, where I want it to have one, Thrall's, I think he said grind should have grit. And I think there could be a little more of that on this for sure. I'm totally with you, bro.
Well, while you're up, what are your thoughts on the production? Did you already talk about this? Is it up to me?
I did. Yeah, okay. No, I'm just interrupting everybody because that's what I do.
Production for me, it's clean, it's heavy. It emphasizes a great guitar tone. The drums are pristinely clear. I did notice a couple times when things were really fast and a lot going on, the cymbals kind of get lost in it, but that kind of happens. That's just kind of the way that goes. But I didn't even think the vocals were too loud. It just seemed like everything sat really well in its zone, and it didn't bother me at all. But let's talk about our least favorite songs. TJ, we'll start with you.
I really liked everything on here.
Me too.
There's really nothing that I didn't like, but so established dominance, know your place, dog knotted, showering teeth. I mean, for me, those are all kind of standout tracks. They've all got cool little elements of just all kinds of stuff going on, showcase what they're doing. To pick one that I didn't, maybe it was beating those we despise. It gets a little mundane a little bit, but I don't know. I still thought it was a cool track. So overall, there really isn't any stinkers on here for me. I really like this record a lot. So, but that's kind of
Kellen.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's no misstep, like terrible misstep on this record. One glaring track that you sort of wince at, or like, oh God, I cannot believe I'm going to have to listen to this for the 4th time this week. But
Calypso part on that Twilight Force
there
album.
you go.
Like,
Yeah,
what is happening right now?
Yeah.
Why?
So yeah, there's no real terrible song here. There's a lot of very like consistent tracks. So I would agree with TJ there. My 2 favorites are for the dynamic, to kind of like circle back to TJ's point about like when speed becomes, potentially too much. One of my favorite moments on this record, I think, is the 4th track, Fountains of Bile. I thought the sort of the breakdown in that was my favorite in terms of gear shift on it. Some dynamic swing. And then we've talked about it a few times, but the Showering Teeth, I completely agree that like intro riff that's going on there is one of the clear moments where like I understand where a sort of blackened sort of element is in, sort of entered the scene there. So that was one of more like of the concise and articulate moments on the record where the riff sort of really stood out. And when I was making my notes, I'm definitely coming back to that track here. So those are the 2 real standouts for me.
Right on. TJ, you already went. Jim.
Yeah, so no surprise, I'm going to disagree with TJ here. I love Beating Those We Despise. That's one of my favorites. Like I mentioned earlier, it's definitely got a Morbid Angel feel in the main riffs in the song, which I freaking love. Covenant's one of my all-time favorite albums. So you do anything that sounds even remotely like that, and I'm a sucker for it. So some great Morbid Angel love there, but done through their lens completely. It's not a rip-off. I mean, they're making it their own, and it sounds awesome. Irate, I already mentioned. Killer drum work. Totally agree with Marty. Wish the drums were up a little bit, but when you pay attention to what's going on, the cymbal work on that song is definitely headbang inducing. So is the scale-based riff that happens about a minute and a half in. You're like, whoa, what's that? And it's not like Yngwie scale. It's just like just a slightly like like a kind of a slow kind of a dissension kind of roll, like it's just like it's really cool, and it kind of draws you in if you like that style of playing. Dog Knotted, we keep going back to old Dog Knotted, man. I mean the distorted bass it like they really give it that the guitars cut out and let the bass just shine for a second in that song, and the guy's got a killer bass. I don't know what he's doing with his rig, but I would like to know, because I really really like his bass sound. It's really awesome there, and a killer riff about 3 minutes 30 in. I highly recommend you check out that song for that reason. And for something that the song that I maybe don't like as much, and first of all, let me just say I agree with all you guys. I've listened to this album rather several times over and over, and I do. I like the whole thing. And, but the one song that I don't like as much is really the title, the first track, Established Dominance, because, it starts out with that vocal, and it was so off-putting to me. And I didn't realize, I was like, what am I getting into here? Please don't tell me TJ's put a deathcore band up on here. But as soon as the song kept going, and I realized, oh, okay, the guy just has his choice for his vocals are really strange, but then from that moment on, the album grabbed me. So that it's still a good song, but in terms of what comes after, I think the other songs after the first one far outshine it, and it closes really strong with Showering Teeth. Everybody here on this show, we all talk about you got to close strong. Showering Teeth, killer playing. The way the guitar and bass interplay. plus awesome song title as I already mentioned. So yeah, it's just a strong record, you know, and so just minor gripes here all the way around.
All right. Least favorite songs. Again, I'm going to echo the sentiment that there was nothing on here that bothered me musically, song wise, but favorites. No More Heroes really stood out for me. I really like the scathing melodies that rage over exact blast beats. Memorable riffs are made more meaningful by very smart and unexpected song structures. Beating those we despise. This one's got just an excellent old school attack to it. It's just kind of head down in rage type of feel to that song. It's to the point, fast, and never losing sight of memorable riffs. That's at the heart of every one of these songs. The riffs, whether they're stripped down and more old school sounding or a little bit more leaning towards thrash or a little techie, they've all got a memorable slant to them, which is very cool. Gnaw Their Bones, I liked as well. I loved how the band breaks out of tremolo speed picking for more minor thrash and melodeath music ideas and guitar stylings, which is kind of cool. And of course, Showering Teeth has an excellent bridge in it that adds so much motion with a pulsing guitar progression. It's very interesting. I found it very interesting in that song. I could have said something good about all the songs. They're really a well-written band. They're doing what they do well. And I guess I'll just leave it up for me here with the judgment, final thoughts. It's a band that's doing for their first album. This is a good mission statement. Do I think they're reinventing the wheel? No. Are they doing anything that really stands out from the throng of other bands? No. Which it could be kind of a damning thing to say about a band, but I mean, if I bought this record, I'd be happy with it. I'd probably listen to it a lot over a week or two, and then it would probably slip into the rack and be gone for years. It's that type of band for me. It's not something. I think it's really well done. I think it's really well structured. I like the sound. I like everything they're doing. But if it's going to come down to it, if I'm in the mood for this style, I'm listening to Inhale Exhale by Nazem. That's how that's going to play out for this. I don't want to say that and make everybody think this album sucks, because it doesn't. It's just really good. But there's just a lot coming out in this style, has been coming out for decades, and they're doing good. They hold their own, but there's not a humongous wow factor for me. Jim.
Yeah, I do understand they're not reinventing the wheel. However, I think that there's the styles of riffs they're bringing together, and their sound, our overall sound of the instruments, I really like. So I think that I maybe like it a little bit better than you did for that reason, Marty. But the vocals are an issue for me, so that's what kind of like has me on the fence about, because I thought about, I really like this. I'm thinking about maybe picking up a CD of it or something, but can I get past the vocals? And someone mentioned in the comments that the production on the later albums are better, so maybe I need to check out I know they have a new one out, or 1 year old album out, and maybe I'll check that one out. But because that's the only gripe, and honestly, that's why I'm giving this an 8.0. Like, it would be like an 8.5, if that weird, super clean layered vocal thing wasn't there. It's just so distracting for me, for the music. But if we're going on riffs alone, all day, it's still a worthy vibe.
Yeah.
But for me, 8.0, and I could see myself getting, if not this album, I could get something of theirs on CD, especially if they kind of tone down the vocal attack in favor of putting their instrumentation more forward. So.
Right on. Kellen.
Yeah, I feel sometimes on these album clubs, like if you get an 8 out of 10, it's almost like a death sentence. Like it's a good record, but you get disappears into the fray, right? And you'd never to be seen again.
Well, that happens if you have a big collection, and then
sure.
The way as collectors, we're so geared towards consuming the new stuff, listening to the new shit, never getting back to the old shit. And as soon as I file any record away, I'm probably not going to see it for at least a year or two, at least, if not more.
Sure, and I kind of feel like if we have like a really polarized reaction, like we absolutely hate it, it's nothing you would ever buy, but at least like you're emotionally involved in the record,
Yeah.
or you love it and you sing its praises and you're all good and you're gonna bring it out, for the next 2 weeks straight. But this is a record like you could give an 8 out of 10, and I would not feel it's like a damning statement, right? It's like it's an accurate sort of presentation of how I don't ever score records, but it's one that's like good, and I don't feel apathetic towards it. It isn't for me. I would disagree with Marty. I don't hear. To me, it sounded weird enough, in the sense that it's trying to do a bunch of different things, and I didn't feel it executed it in a way that was appealing. But like I hear like 20,000 different bands that want to sound like Archgoat versus bands that necessarily sound like this. So I kind of would steer in the other way. There's far more sort of war metal bands that are doing something like, that I feel are less interesting or uninnovative grindcore bands. Like I think there's enough like combination of styles. I don't even get the modern tech death scene. I completely have a hard time with. So like there's an interesting convergence here for me where I think it should, hopefully people will watch this and they'll become intrigued to at least check it out.
Yeah, it's worth checking out. I'm not saying I don't like the album.
Sure,
I do.
sure.
I just know that if I were to buy this, it would be 2 hot weeks with it, and I would probably never listen to it again.
Yeah. So I know that to, I think, echo Jim comments, I think Nick mentioned that the production changes in the next couple of records, which cool. Maybe I'll check it out. But it was a cool listen, and maybe not on my style specifically when it comes to like genre convention or production, but I thought it was still an interesting listen, and I enjoyed it this past week. So
absolutely. TJ.
Yeah, well, I'll score a record. I give it an A. I like this record. Who was it on the comments? Tip Fam, what did he say? Well, Werewolf are not inventing the wheel here, but they're putting a set of 35-inch rims on a Model T and racing through the outback. I think that's pretty good. I mean, I don't really, at this point in the game, who's reinventing anything?
Nobody,
yeah.
And if it is reinvented, it's so out there, no one wants to listen to the damn thing.
Well, that's just it. And so it's like, to go by that, it's like, no, these guys are living in their influences. They're delivering on it, and they've delivered a great record. I like grind. I go in phases with stuff. I'll go through and I'll be absorbed in my Black Sabbath collection for a long time. Revisit it and listen to all of it, and then I'll like, and then I'm off to something. And grind is this kind of stuff. I'm like, I want, I'm digging around and I come across it, and then next thing you know, I got to have whatever, and
yeah,
this is part of it. This is how we're at the time I stumbled across this, and it was just like, and to Marty's point, my collection is quite humble compared to some of these gentlemen here, but this stuff will get lost in here. You'll buy it and you'll listen to it for a while, and it's true, but
as soon as it's filed, it's gone, man.
Yeah, and they're just rifling through trying to figure out what to bring for this week. It was just like, what am I doing? And I'm going through my little stacks here, and it's like, you know what? And so I hadn't thought about this record in a minute, and now it's like, oh God, they got 2 other records I got to buy,
and an EP.
Yeah, and I definitely, stop it. So I definitely want to pick them. I have heard some of the newer stuff. I think it was Thralls that mentioned the video, the lyric video off the new one. I've seen that. It's really sick. But again, I think this record's great. I give it an A. I will revisit this. It's just super killer, and it's listenable. Where some bands can just, it's like with Portal. I like Portal. You guys are kind of all over the place on that band. And it's not a band that you can sit down and just be like, yeah, I'm gonna rock some Portal and have a beer.
Yeah, I mean,
chill by the
it's just-
fire.
it just sucks for an hour and a half. It sounds like
You
fun.
It's
He's got a
something-
clock on his head. Crazy. Yeah.
I like it. I mean, but that's the thing.
All
It's
the
like
stuff. Ooh.
I put it in I put it in rotation in a on a playlist when I'm out in the shop, and and then I'll have 8 records that are going, and that'll be one, and it'll be there, and it's and that's how I listen to that band, but this kind of this band, this record, and I'm sure the stuff I've heard off the subsequent releases, I could sit and chill on this stuff and listen to these guys and do whatever, and so definitely think it's cool. It's a killer record.
Cool. Did everybody have a turn on that last one? All right. Well, Tej.
Yeah, Halloween, here it comes.
No. As much as I would want to. We're going on the other side of the spectrum here. I mentioned it in the chat last time. Going with Unholy, the second Ring of Power. Pretty creative Black Doom band. This is a really great record. Unique, interesting, weird. They're Finns, so they're bizarre. I believe this is a repress. Nuclear Blast, Avant-Garde, Nuclear Blast, East West. Weird. Anyway, yep, Unholy's second album, the second Ring of Power. Check it out. Yeah, it was a good pick, TJ. Thanks for picking that. It was cool to hear that band. I probably never would have checked them out otherwise.
You're welcome.
A little bit of show note action. Friday, we've got S. Craig Zoller, well-known, renowned producer, musician, writer, you name it. He's involved in it, and he's coming back to do. We're going to do a deep dive on Morbid Angel on Friday's show, so that should be fun. Check out Killing for Company, please. A great YouTube channel. Check out Eihwaz Recordings, please. Buy some stuff. Check out The Glorious Dead, please. We got a new album coming out here in a couple months. Also, check out Res Metal Podcast, I believe it is. You're in the chat. Great channel. Check out Thralls of Metal. Nick is in the chat. Great. If you're watching this, chances are he's got a bunch of subs. You watch him as well. They do a lot of great reviews over there and streaming and all sorts of other stuff. We have a really good community surrounding us here and a lot of good people in the chat. Please go take a minute and check out their stuff. But that's it. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add before we pull the plug? Pull the
plug. Nice. We're gonna know that.
All right, on. We'll see you Friday, and we'll see these fine gentlemen next week. Oh, we're doing reviews. We got reviews typically on Monday. Sometimes there's 2 weeks. Sometimes it's just one a week. Just put up one with Rick. Nope, Simon. We had Rick on Thursday last week, and we did Simon this week. So we got some cool reviews up. Go check them out, please. Not a lot of you are checking them out, but they're fun, they're informative, and they're just plain fun. So anyway, we'll see you Friday. Everybody, thanks. We'll see you next week.